Introduction to The Face on the Barroom Floor by George Takei. I'm particularly delighted to be asked to introduce a story that captures two things that were very important to me in Star Trek: a touch of humor and a genuine joy in diversity. Sulu could unabashedly have dreams of D'Artagnan and nightmares of a samurai, and it's only fitting that the dignified Captain Kirk can have eyes for a samurai suit and the courage to let go of a bit of that dignity for a time. In a way, that's a symbol of all that was best in Star Trek. We could trade jokes, even trade dreams, nightmares, and traditions. Sulu has been described as oriental but not inscrutable. His tastes were wide-ranging, from the swashbuckling swordplay of a musketeer's dream to the exotic biology of excitable plants. He could swap a joke with Chekhov, or be left in command of the Enterprise in the toughest moment of the outbreak of war with the Klingons. Star Trek said, not only in words, that people can be proud of their cultural roots, but not bound by them, not limited, not divided. People can choose from the best of any culture, love and respect for each other as individuals. I am proud to be part of that statement, and proud of all the diverse people of all time who have responded to it. It has been a joy to me to meet them, to see what they are doing in writing, in art, in life. It is my greatest hope that they will work evermore to realize the ideals they see in Star Trek in this life, this world, this time. Much of my energy for many years has been devoted to that aim, and the same is true for many of the others of the cast and crew who have the same feeling on this spaceship Earth as aboard the good ship Enterprise. It is my hope that those who see the dream will not settle for the dream, but will make it a reality. And let us, by all means, still find time to smile in the doing, and not always stand upon our dignity. Sulu would get a good chuckle from the events of this story, and so would Kirk. In fact, my guess is that they would fall on each other's shoulders in a belly laugh, and laugh until there were tears in their eyes. When we can all do that, without doubt or division, that will be my dream. The Face on the Barroom Floor by Eleanor Arnenson and Ruth Berman. Spock turned away from his panels of sensors to observe the captain cautiously. Kirk was quickly and efficiently handling a number of tasks, scanning the leave schedules and power consumption reports brought in by Yeoman for his signature, exchanging formal greetings with the captain of the Neb Queen, a freighter also in orbit around Kranzi, and discussing the possibility of asking Engineer Scott to give the Queen a hand with some trouble they'd had in their drive alignment. Checking with Scott that he didn't mind, recording his log report. If Spock had not been a Vulcan, he would have fidgeted. McCoy, not being a Vulcan, was under no such constraint. "Hurry up, will you?" he said. "I'll be just a moment, Bones," said Kirk. McCoy frowned. "Shall I make it a doctor's orders? Even captains need to go on leave." Kirk paid no attention. McCoy sighed. The whole crew was still on edge after a rough passage through ion storms, and Kirk was obviously feeling still too jittery to enjoy the thought of visiting Kranzi, the most populous of a number of inhabited planets within that star group. The outer members of the cluster were highly active, making it difficult to reach the inner stars. The Enterprise had just completed a difficult escort journey, guiding a shipload of would-be colonists through the least active of the outer segments into one of the cluster's habitable planets. After leaving the colonists, the Enterprise proceeded to pay a courtesy call at Kranzi to exchange news, make repairs, and take shore leave. Spock stood up and poised his body to walk toward Kirk's chair. Unconsciously, Kirk got up too. "Mr. Spock, you have the con," he said as Spock slipped into his chair. A yeoman came up with another report. Spock took it from her so smoothly that it did not look as if he had grabbed it. Kirk looked at Spock quizzically as the yeoman retreated. "My responsibility, sir," said Spock. Kirk looked first startled and then amused. Spock seized his advantage. "I am in command of the ship, Captain," he said. Kirk laughed and joined McCoy, waiting not very patiently by the elevator, and helmsman Sulu, who was also ready to go on leave. The doors closed after the three of them, and Spock leaned back in the captain's chair, alone on the bridge, except for Chekhov at the navigational console, and Uhura at her communications board. Spock, like humans, needed a rest now and then, much as he hated to admit it. With most of the crew down on Kranzi, he had the ship almost to himself, and he looked forward to a restful day of silence. On Kranzi's surface, Kirk left the port of entry transporter chamber with McCoy and Sulu. As the planet had rather primitive institutions, they had to stop at a bank to get currency, then had to begin spending it by getting money bags to hold it in. They were also the last of the crew to come down, and so found themselves going out as a group, together in search of amusement, rather to Sulu's surprise. The helmsman was a convivial soul who enjoyed being with people, but he was a little in awe of Kirk. He could not help watching the captain as they walked along girl-watching and window-shopping to see if he was really human, and McCoy, for more professional reasons, was doing the same. A neo-samurai outfit in the window of a clothing store caught Sulu's eye, and all three stopped to look at it. It was gaudy, with metallic interweaving, and completely different from the austerity of their plain uniforms. "Nonsense," said Kirk. "When would you wear it?" "Off duty," said Sulu, "but it doesn't look my type anyway." They wandered on to the end of the block, where they paused again to consider a large bar, the Krasny Xanadu, suspended in midair above an artificial lake. A fountain in the center spurted up a jet of water that ended just beneath the floor, so that the building appeared to be held up by the water. Sulu whistled. "It's quite an anti-grav unit they've got there." "Shall we?" said McCoy. Kirk hesitated. "Looks a little ostentatious." "Suits your rank," said McCoy. "Besides, I have expensive tastes." They started up the ramp. Kirk stopped halfway up. "What's the matter?" said McCoy, halting a few paces up. "Nothing. You go ahead. I'll be there in a moment. Thought of something I should tell Spock." McCoy gave him a sour look, but went in with Sulu. Kirk took out his communicator. "Enterprise, Kirk here." "Spock here, Captain," said Spock's voice. "It just occurred to me that there is no reason for Scotty to report back when he's through on the Deneb Queen. He had to go on leave from there directly." "Very well, Captain," Spock said patiently. Kirk got the impression that Spock had already had the same bright idea and acted on it. He shrugged. "Kirk out." He closed the communicator and stood absently for a few moments, enjoying the play of light on the water. When he went inside, he discovered that the floor was transparent from inside, giving a view of the fountain. He also discovered that McCoy and Sulu had acquired a table and 3 women. "Yes, but uniforms are drab," one was saying. She stopped as McCoy looked up and waved. "Renee, this is Jim," McCoy announced to the one who had spoken. "Take his mind off his work." He looked at Kirk half mischievously, half anxiously. "Hello, Renee," said Kirk pleasantly. "Welcome to the Folly," she said, matching his tone. "The Folly?" "Krasny's Folly. The planet," she explained. "But they don't like jokes and records." "It just got us down on the charts as just Krasny," said one of the other women. "What was so foolish about Mr. Krasny?" asked Sulu, making conversation. "Well, to begin with," said Renee. "Oh, good," she interrupted herself as the table opened and their drinks arrived. "Bones," Kirk protested. The doctor had ordered a round of mint juleps. McCoy shrugged. "Order something you like better." He pulled the remaining chair out from the table for Kirk. Kirk pulled a face and said jokingly, "Watched pots never relax." McCoy correctly refused to take it as a joke. "Well, there's a cure for that," he said. "There is?" said Kirk. McCoy nodded. "Go away." He took a mouthful of his mint julep and meditated for a moment on the coolness of it. "And don't go back to the ship." Kirk looked at the door and tapped his hand on the back of the chair. "And don't worry about whether I'll be back on time for my shift. That's Spock's problem." Kirk grinned. "All right, Bones. Sorry, Renee." McCoy looked glum as Kirk swung away and disappeared out the door. "Relax," Sulu suggested. "I tell other people that," snapped McCoy. "All the same." He picked up his glass again. Outside, Kirk meandered down the street and halted in the middle of the block, staring again at the glittering, warlike suit that had caught Sulu's eye. He looked at himself in the semi-mirror of the store window, one half of him yellow, one black. A bit of braid, small badge. It wasn't drab exactly. It was efficient, comfortable, tailored to move to his actions. After buying the suit, Kirk walked out of the store feeling foolish, but free. He looked at himself again in the window, enjoying the shifting of the light against his new clothes. His uniform was a neat brown paper package bulking under one arm. Looking at it, he realized that it was a nuisance to carry. He hurried back to the port and dropped a quarter credit into a voice locker, stashing the uniform inside. James T. Kirk, he told the locker, and sauntered out, name and uniform behind him. A short stroll in the direction away from the Kranzi Xanadu brought him to a rougher section of town, and he stopped at the first bar he came to. It was full of men and the buzzing of conversations. Kirk went in. The neo-samurai clothes stopped conversation for a moment within a radius of 3 meters or so. The number of raised eyebrows around made Kirk think of Spock. He felt suddenly lonely for the Enterprise. Then the conversation resumed. "It's not the blue eyes I mind, it's the pink tentacles," was all Kirk heard before the general buzz covered individuals. He began threading his way between tables to the bar. Kirk gave the barmaid his very best Prince Charming smile, but she reacted professionally, looking him over carefully and suspiciously. "Like a beer," Kirk said. "Right," she said, taking down a glass. "You new around here?" "Yes, my name's Harry Leroy. I'm a relief helmsman on the Deneb Queen." Came out smoothly enough. The woman looked displeased. "The Deneb Queen," she muttered. "Here's your beer. 1 credit. Kirk gathered that Deneb Queen men were well known and not particularly welcome. "Why is the planet called Krasny's Folly?" he asked as he paid for his drink. The woman softened a bit. "Now that's a story." The objector to pink tentacles came up just then, a giant ox of a man wanting refills for his table. But it'll have to wait." On board the Enterprise, Chekhov was studying Andorian history. He had started at the back of the tape with the exciting part, meeting of Terrans and Andorians, and was now regretting it as he worked his way diligently through their age of exploration. He glanced behind him. Uhura was frankly dozing over her board, and Spock was probably meditating, but it looked much the same to Chekhov. He considered imitating them and decided that his conscience would let him nap if he kept going another 10 minutes. Just then, something began buzzing at Uhura's board. She woke up with a start, and Chekhov put his viewer aside. Perhaps something more interesting was coming in. Kirk fired a dot. It hit the board on the outer edge. "Not bad," said his opponent, encouraging. The second dart hit the wall. "The thing of it is, you've got to be able to think like a navigator. The vector of the force you put on the dart, combined with the vector of gravitational..." "Thanks," said Kirk. He threw the third dart, and it hit the wall. He gathered the darts up and handed them to his opponent. The first dart hit the center ring. "By the way," said Kirk, "why is the planet called Krasny's Folly?" That's a yarn and a half. Wait till after the game's over." The second dart hit the edge of the center ring. "Starship Enterprise acknowledged," said Uhura. "Starship Enterprise acknowledging. Your signal is weak." "Yes, I know," said a tiny voice. "We can't help it." Uhura put the volume on high and set the computer to compensate for static. "Can you hear me?" the voice blasted out of the speaker. Uhura winced. "Affirmative," she said. "You don't need to shout." Spock came and leaned over the communications board. "Commander Spock, Enterprise here. Please identify yourself." "Antonio Perez, on board the passenger ship Starfarer. Where's Jim?" "The captain is not on board at present." "What?" said Perez. "But Kirk and his ship come in a set, like a hermit crab in its shell. How'd you get him out?" "The captain is on shore leave," said Spock. "Can I help you?" Perez snorted. "If you can't, tell Jim to think of me from time to time. He'll know when. The Starfarer's had some kind of blowout. Can't be precise, because it hit the bridge and the auxiliary controls are effective. And the bulkhead slammed down to keep the air in. There's about 300 of us alive, we think. I haven't finished counting. If we all keep on breathing and no one volunteered to stop, we should be out of air in 5 days. Where are you?" "In orbit around the planet Krasny of Krasny's star." "Krasny. Oh, that Krasny." They could hear a hurried consultation in the background as Perez and a Starfarer officer discussed position and power. "We can get our full speed, but that puts us 8 days away from you." "That is satisfactory. We will rendezvous with the Starfarer," said Spock. "What is your present position?" Perez gave him the coordinates. "Mr. Chekhov, compute route and time to rendezvous. Lieutenant Uhura, notify Krasny Port that we will break orbit in 10 hours. "It's not very efficient," said Perez reproachfully. "We have to recall the crew, Commander. Skeleton crew can operate the ship, but should another emergency arise—" "Don't quote the relevant regulations," said Perez. Spock closed his mouth, reconsidered, and said, "What caused the Starfarer's malfunction?" The officer, whose voice had been heard in the background before, took the communicator from Perez. "Second Navigator Lo Cha here," he said. "Sir, we don't know. We began to lose air, and the inside locks failed to close immediately. The fore section lost all its air." His voice was beginning to sound strained. "Your pardon, sir." In the distance, they heard Perez's voice. "Go lie down, lack-brain." He took over the communicator again. "Sorry, Mr. Spock, but an injured second navigator is the best we can do for Technolese, and we're saving that to keep the ship running. Who knows what happened? It's a new ship. My father always told me, don't try anything new. Wait and see if anyone dies from it. Here I am, wondering how such a smart man got a half-wit for a son." He sighed. "Perez out." Spock returned to the command chair and looked thoughtfully from Uhura to Chekhov. Uhura had notified the Kranzi port, put out a general alert for Enterprise men, and begun specific calls to her fellows in communications and to transportermen. Both groups had hard work ahead in finding and retrieving 2/3 of the crew. In the second round, Kirk took aim, sighting along the dart and moving his arm back and forth experimentally without raising the dart. Then he threw it, and it landed precisely in the middle of the glass of the man who objected to pink tentacles. "Watch it, will you?" said the objector. "Trying to kill someone?" Kirk reached for the dart with one hand, and with the other tried to mop up some of the splattered green liquid. He was never quite sure which of his elbows knocked over the rest of the drink. With a roar, the objector rose out of his chair and took a swing at Kirk, who ducked. "Lay off," suggested one of the objector's drinking mates. "Leave the little guy alone." In astonishment, Kirk stared at the man still seated at the table. One was a small, thin-faced man who could have no business calling Kirk a little guy. The other— "Yeah? Want to stop me?" said the objector. "Why not?" said the other, rising endlessly out of his chair. The objector had a good 4 inches on Kirk, but the other was big and burly enough for a Jillian warrior. Kirk mentally dropped his objection to the other's description of him, and set about trying to restore tranquility to the atmosphere. "Now, look," he began. "Let's see you try," said the objector to his companion, and the two behemoths fell on each other, the two nearest tables, and half the occupants thereof. The occupants, with shouts of protest, piled into the brawl. Kirk looked at the dart still held in his hand, with a futile sense of great oaks from little acorns. "You Deneb Queen guy," said a disgusted female voice at his shoulder. "You can just stand there looking pretty and get a fight started. No sense of responsibility." The barmaid clicked her tongue. Kirk winced, scowled, and examined the brawl carefully. For just a moment he could see the two behemoths flailing in the center of it, their thrashings bringing even more tables, chairs, and people into the hog pile. Kirk sprang at that second, and he heard with a sense of pleasure a gasp of wonder from the onlookers as he not only reached, but separated the behemoths, chopped one to the floor, and turned to deal with the other. Then the rest of the brawl closed in on him. It had gone too far to be stopped by removing the two who had begun it. Kirk had one last picture, vivid as delirium, of the little man from the behemoth's table, crawling on the floor among the floundering bodies, with an alert expression of deep interest on his face. After that, the press of bodies and furniture was too close to let Kirk see anything, and his one thought was to keep breathing and get out. As if from far away, he heard the barmaid's voice. "Port security? I got a riot going on." "Yeah, thanks." Uhura finished tracking down all the communication and transporter personnel. It had not been an easy task. Lieutenant Palmer, now seated beside her at the board with her blonde hair hanging damply down the middle of her back, had been under a hairdryer. Lieutenant Kyle had been with a woman, and he expressed his unhappiness in a set of curses that fascinated both Spock and Uhura, and shocked those on the bridge for whom English was a native language. Kyle returned promptly, however, and Uhura went on with the individual calls, leaving it to Palmer to acknowledge the responses coming in to the general alert. "Captain Kirk, please acknowledge," he said, touching the frequency to signal his communicator. "Captain Kirk, please acknowledge." Down in the bar, the small, thin-faced man squirmed himself out of the tangle of arms and legs, and seated himself in a dark corner to count his collection of money bags. One of them began bleeping, and he made a worried noise, sucking his lips against his teeth, as he realized that he had picked up someone's communicator. He held it firmly shut and moused his way through the shadows to a disposal chute. He slipped the communicator in and then began taking money out of the bags and dropping bags and non-negotiable contents down the chute after the communicator. He estimated that he had time to do that and avoid the risk of being picked up with the identified property and still get clear before the riot squad arrived. However, he estimated wrong. Someone at the door gave the ancient cry of "Cheese it!" and the brawl went thundering out the door and vanished into the streets. The man at the disposal chute was farthest from the door. He was therefore the last one out the door, and he caromed into a giant red chest. "Excuse me," he said, trying to sidle past. A large red arm blocked his way. He looked up. "Oh, hi, Bud. How are you?" "Fine, thanks," said Bud. "How are you, Maury?" Bud twitched Maury's money bag out of his hands. "Now, look, I wasn't fighting anyone. She'll tell you that," Maury complained, turning around to point at the barmaid. He stopped with his arm out in the air and whistled in amazement at the change in the bar. The floor was peaceful and serene, with only the fragments of splintered furniture, and one man, in a gaudy neo-samurai outfit, out cold on the floor, to bear witness to the brawl. "Maury, you got too much money on you," said Bud sadly, and handed him over to another security man. Bud came further into the bar. "You took long enough," said the woman. "All gone?" "All but Sleeping Beauty here." Uhura, feeling puzzled, reported to Mr. Spock her failure to reach the captain and went on with individual calls to Dr. McCoy and Mr. Spock. Kirk spluttered and gagged as a liter of cold water hit him in the face. What is it?" he said, trying to sit up. Bud pulled him to his feet. "Come on, mister." "Wait a minute," said the barmaid. "At least this one can pay for his own drinks." "Oh, sure," said Kirk, trying to take the words in. "How much?" $2.10. He fumbled for his money bag. "I've been robbed." Bud sighed. "That figures." "Well," he looked at the barmaid, "Maury's law looks as if it's enough to pay your costs and damages, and—" He looked at Kirk. "There'll probably be some of your share left over to help pay your fine. We got laws against public brawling on this planet, mister. What's your name?" "James T. Kirk of the—" "That's not what you said before, Leroy," said the bar name. "His name's Henry Leroy," she added to Bud. "He was involved in the brawl?" "Oh, yeah." "You're under arrest, Mr. Leroy. Come along." McCoy made a face as his communicator sounded. "You know," he said to Sulu, "I think a fellow could get to like this sake of yours, if you ever get a chance to try it properly." "McCoy here. Take 2 aspirin." "Sorry, doctor," said Uhura. "All leaves cancelled." At the jail, Bud booked Kirk in for the night. "Sleep it off. Call your captain in the morning," the officer at the desk told Kirk in a fatherly way. "I am my captain. I am Captain James T. Kirk of the Starship Enterprise." "And I am Marie of Romania," murmured Bud. "Look, let me call the Xanadu. A couple of my shipmates are there." "The Xanadu? Well, well." The officer and Bud exchanged a look of surprise. The officer shrugged and put through the call for Kirk, but no Dr. McCoy answered the page. Neither did a Mr. Sulu. "It's not the end of the world, son. This your first time in quad?" Kirk nodded. "Well, look at it this way. Save you the price of a hotel room, your captain will bail you out in the morning. Just once won't hurt your record much, and you'll know better another time." He turned to Bud. "Lock 'em up." "But—" Kirk gave up and submitted to the inevitable. "And do you know where the captain went?" Spock asked. "No," said McCoy shortly. "Spock, what all is going on here?" "We received a distress call," Spock began. "Here it is again, sir," Uhura said. Spock punched the voice on. "Yes, Commander?" "We have the figures on our population and life expectancy ready now. You got Jim?" "We have not located him yet, Commander," said Spock. "You've lost Jim. Took him out of his shell, and now something's eaten him." McCoy grinned despite himself. "You spoke of more precise data?" Spock changed the subject. That. We have 311 survivors, enough air for 4 days, 10 hours, plus or minus 3. If you leave as scheduled, it gives us a margin of 2 to 8 hours. "Thank you," said Spock. "You're very welcome, Mr. Spock. May I suggest that the margin could be fattened up a little if you left sooner?" "We will attempt to do so," said Spock. He got the connection and asked Uhura, "Estimated time for recall?" "We have enough of the crew to leave now, sir. It looks as if we have almost everyone back soon." She waited, but Spock made no comment on the fact that communications and transport were doing a good job. Lieutenant Palmer leaned over and whispered, "Once more, dear friends, into the breach." Uhura chuckled, and the two went on with their manhunt. McCoy said in a low voice, "Spock, you softy." "Doctor?" "You don't want to leave Jim behind, because our schedule's so tight we won't get back for 3 months. He'll miss that visit he's got lined up with his nephews while at the starbase." "You overlooked the fact, Doctor, that the purpose of our visit to the base is to give the ship its periodic repair and updating. The captain knows your ship better than any other single officer. The work cannot be done adequately in his absence. The Enterprise is overdue for its checkup, and further delay would be unsafe." "You're a softy," repeated McCoy, and beat a retreat to the lift before Spock could tell him he was being illogical. Kirk paced back and forth in the little cell that he shared with the little man he had last seen on the floor in the brawl. Bud had introduced him as Maury Singh. Maury lay on the right-hand bunk watching him, and kept count up to 50 turns, at which point he decided that his cellmate had had his fair share of nuisance-making. "Hey, Leroy, will you cut that out? I can't sleep with you pedaling around like an imitation tiger." "What? Oh, sorry," said Kirk, sitting down on the left-hand bunk and holding his head in his hands. "I'm worried about my ship." "Why, you the captain or something?" "Something," said Kirk grimly. "Well, calm down. You get tried tomorrow afternoon, maybe day after tomorrow." "My ship was scheduled to leave tomorrow afternoon." "The Dead Queen? No, it isn't." Kirk's shoulders slumped. How far had his innocent lie circulated? Not the Queen. The Enterprise. Maury eyed Kirk's battered face and the gaudy clothes ripped at the shoulder. "If you say so. Make enough of a fuss tomorrow morning, they maybe get you tried early. So they'll fine you maybe 100 for drunk and disorderly. Call your ship, get the captain to pay the fine, dock it off your salary. What's the worry?" "I don't think the captain will be in when they call." "Oh, first mate got it in for you?" said Maudie, nodding wisely. "No, he..." "Forget it," said Kirk. "Yeah, that's what I told you. Now me, I got a real problem." "Oh," said Kirk without enthusiasm. "That rat Bud." "Who's he?" said Kirk, beginning to feel faintly interested. "The nosy who arrested me tonight. He could have waited till tomorrow night. I mean, I might have spent the money by then, but I probably have most of it left. But the thing of it is, I wanted to be free tomorrow, and he knew it. I told him so last week when I got Charlie's invite. Charlie's getting married tomorrow. He's my only brother." "That's too bad." "Yeah, Charlie always throws a good wedding." Maury sighed noisily, got up, and began to pace. "My turn," he said apologetically, and went from wall to wall, back and forth, like a ping-pong ball in a volley. "If it was anyone else," he said at one wall, "I wouldn't mind so much," he said at the other. "But Charlie's a great guy." "Why don't we break out?" said Kirk sardonically. Maury halted with his nose up against the wall and tapped his fingers against it meditatively, then turned around, took a seat on the bunk. "That's a good idea," he said. "You got a pick on you?" "Bud always confiscates mine." "A pick? For an electronic lock?" "Sure. Gets the classical music stations, too." Kirk eyed him doubtfully, but he seemed to be serious. "Well," Kirk said, "one of us could pretend to be sick and call for the guard, and we could jump him when he came." Maury winced and addressed the wall plaintively. "All the cells in the world, and I get one with a cornball in it. There's no justice." "Can't hurt to try," said Kirk. "Just fake a little delirium, can't you? Babble of green fields or something." He got up and tested the bars. They were solid. "I wish we had Spock here," he said aloud to himself. "Oh? Is he good at getaways?" Maury had overheard him. "Well, yes, he is." Kirk grinned as if it occurred to him that he and Spock actually were an accomplished pair of jailbreakers, what with the one hostile society and another. Even without Spock, he thought, he should be able to manage something. "Do you want to play sick, or should I?" "No." Maury rolled his knuckles along the blanket, looked at Kirk, and then hopped to his feet. "You want to do it, cornball?" We do it, cornball. We don't do it so one of us has to be laying down when the guard shows up. We fight. Fight, said Kirk, not immediately comprehending. Leroy, you purple bloodroom! Say that again, shouted Maury, putting up his fists. Kirk looked bewildered as Maury advanced upon him, waving a fist in the general direction of his nose. Call me a dirty ground caller, would you? Said Maury. No, said Kirk in a smug tone of voice, catching on. I call you an errant mousy-nosed knave, and I'm going to wipe the floor with your head. He fastened his hands loosely around Maury's neck. Help! He'll kill me! Maury thrashed around a bit. Get your hands off me, babyface! Kirk's hands tightened involuntarily at that particular insult, and Maury's next help sounded convincingly choky. Say that again, you crack-brained garbage head. A guard came to the door and aimed a phaser in through the bars. Got it out, boys, he said soothingly. All right, said Kirk, dropping Maury and grabbing at the guard's arm. Maury simultaneously went low to grab at the legs, and the guard's stun beam went high, hitting on the ceiling in a burst of pretty red fireworks. Kirk snatched the phaser away and stunned the guard. Maury caught the body so that it fell where they could reach out and get the keys. As they opened the door, an alarm sounded. They sprinted down the hall. Maury flung the door open and announced, I told Bud I wanted out, then ducked as the officer at the desk fired at him. Kirk leaned in and fired back. The officer slumped in his chair, and the two of them went on through the main door, pulling it shut after them, just in time to block the phaser beams of two more guards, roused too late by the alarm from their graveyard shift napping to catch the fugitives. It was a good thing, Kirk thought, that phasers were routinely left on stun. Full-strength shot would have killed him and or Maury right through the door, not to mention doing considerable damage to the door. Outside, Kirk followed Maury as he skittered down the block to an alley, cut into the alley and ran 1 mile, with scarcely 3 yards of it in a straight line, slid into a dark doorway to wait for some brightly lit traffic passing in the street ahead of them, to go past the current alley. You need a hideout? He asked hospitably. No, thanks, said Kirk. Just tell me how to get to the portmaster's office. Take the 3rd door from the end on the right. Sneak down to the basement. Go through the door marked Keep Out. Maury scowled, his eyes squeezed shut as he visualized. No, he said, opening his eyes. Not that one. The one that says Keep this door locked. Go through the tunnel, into the warehouse, out the back door and turn. He stopped again, his body twisting in the imagined turns. No, there'll be a nosy directing traffic at the door. Well, go out the window with the loose catch on the east side and cut across the 3rd and go... He stopped again and squinted at Kirk. You getting all this? Yes, said Kirk uncertainly. Okay, well you go left 2 blocks and there's another detention station. So go through the all-night shoe store to the alley and... or no, it'll be blocked. This was Mr. Kranzi's day to move their pianos. So you go through the... that doesn't work. So you take... Hey, Leroy, you know something? Kirk shook his head. You can't get there from here. You come to the wedding. Charlie will find you a guide. But how about the nearest public communications outlet? I could call the portmaster. Should be one on the corner. You got any change on you? Kirk sighed and shook his head. Well, come on then, and keep your head down. Maury slid out into the alley, and they headed into the night, hugging the darkest shadows. Uhura rubbed her eyes and stretched in her chair, then swung it around. That's the last of the bars, sir. He isn't in any of them. Isn't any of the restaurants, nightclubs, or bordellos, added Lieutenant Palmer. The portmaster scanned the security and hospital service reports for us, Uhura said by way of appendix, and nobody has a record of James T. Kirk. Nobody. McCoy sat down in Spock's chair, leaned back in it, and stared down his nose at Spock's head, rising over the top of the command chair. You know, Uhura said wearily, I wonder if James T. Kirk could be a mass hallucination dreamed up jointly by the crew of the Enterprise. Uhura wrinkled up her face as if testing a lemon. You have a morbid imagination, Doctor. Oh, I don't know, said McCoy. Spock, can you prove you're not the real captain? Affirmative, Doctor, said Spock without looking around at him, and raised one blue-sleeved arm in the air. The double line of braid, denoting commander's rank, caught the light. McCoy blinked, trying to decide if Spock was taking him literally or making fun of him, and fell silent. The two fugitives darted through the last of the shadows into an obscure doorway, its surface made of the same violet plastic as the wall, and set flush with it, so that the entrance was almost invisible. Kirk glanced nervously up at the sky and around the street. The sky was getting light overhead, and he could make out figures even at a little distance. The windows across the street, a few early risers visible behind them, the fashionably crenellated line at the rooftop. Maury told the door, "Let me in." It creaked and stuck. "Let me in!" Maury bellowed. The door groaned open, and a blast of noise hit them. Kirk involuntarily covered his ears, thinking that it was a wonder the door could respond to voice cues at all in all that racket. Maury beamed. The tail end of a conga line came tramping past the doorway, and it reeled inward to make room for the newcomers to enter. "They've started the party already," Maury explained unnecessarily. The door slammed behind them. The last man in the line dropped off and embraced Maury, exclaiming, "Maury! Charlie! Congratulations! Drinks that way, food that way, bathrooms that way," said Charlie, waving expansively. "The ceremony'll be that end of the room at noon. Got it?" "Got it." Charlie hugged his brother again, pumped Kirk's hand, saying, "Any friend of Maury's?" and he ran to rejoin the conga line. Maury trotted over to the food and began stuffing an improbable set of ingredients in between two slices of orange bread. Bud slammed the corridor window down so hard that its crystal structure chimed once like a striking clock. His assistant squatted down and retrieved his phaser, turning a look of reproach up at Bud all the while. Bud sat down on the windowsill, cutting off the silvery note. "The hell were you doing?" he asked in a tone of courteous interest. "I was trying to stun them before they could get inside and get away." "Sir?" "Nonsense," said Bud. "Nobody goes to Charlie's wedding and just gets away like that." "How do you know?" "Off-worlders." Bud shook his head at such ignorance. "Same way I knew Maury'd come here. If he went to all the trouble to break jail, we can at least let him stay for the wedding." He looked out the window meditatively, then turned and started back down the hallway to the lift. "What are we doing?" his assistant said, hitching his phaser on his belt and running to catch up. "Going to crash the party. We can't keep an eye on them from out here, and Charlie always throws a good wedding." As trusty native guides go, Kirk decided, Maury was a frail reed. He gave up trying to get the little man's attention, turned his back on the dance, and went to the wall. He began prowling along it, looking for a communications outlet. Bud's assistant cleared his throat as softly as it could, and still expected to attract his partner's attention. "Right. You keep an eye on Maury." Bud slipped into the crowd, heading to the other side of the room where the fugitive was exploring the wall. "Jim!" said a high, clear voice. "Jim?" Kirk came to with a start, and he realized that someone was actually calling him by his own name. He turned. "Hello, Renee," he said quietly, feeling suddenly too tired after a sleepless night to show surprise. "I didn't know you knew Charlie." "I don't. I came with Maury." "Oh, you did," she said, looking half surprised and half amused. "Looking for a hidden safe?" she asked as he continued his inspection of the wall. "No, a communicator." "Well, you won't find one there. It's in the next room." She led the way. The next room turned out to be a small office, thickly carpeted, and hung with heavy Regilian tapestry work. The sudden quiet beat on Kirk's ears. He flung himself into the desk chair and said to the communications outlet, "Postmaster's office. James Kirk speaking. Relay to the Enterprise." His sense of relief was married only to the fear that, somehow, something could still go wrong. And something did. The door slid open, and Bud appeared in the entrance, just as Kirk was saying, "Beam me a—" "Why, Bud Kranzi, what's going on?" Renee said. "Get out of the way, Renee," said Bud, and sidestepped around her before she could obey, even if she had intended to. The door closed behind him, and he fired. The whistle of the phaser beam and the hum of the transporter beam sounded together. Kirk fell, sprawled to the top of the desk, turned gold, and vanished. Bud pulled out his communicator. "Calling Deneb Queen." "Deneb Queen?" said Renee. She looked from Bud to the desk and back again. I think I need a cup of coffee, she said. She pursed her lips. I think you need a cup of coffee, too, she added. She marched out the door and headed for the refreshments. Lieutenant Kyle signaled the bridge. The captain's aboard, sir. Then he refocused his eyes and said, I think. Confirmation requested, Mr. Kyle, said Spock's pedantic voice. Yes, sir. It's the captain. He seems to be unconscious, though, said Kyle, not daring to try a description of what the captain looked like. Spock ordered McCoy to go examine the captain and told Sulu to take the ship out of orbit. The Enterprise practically purred as it picked up speed. They were already beyond Kranzi's star and approaching the outer members of the cluster as McCoy told Kyle, "Looks as if the captain's been phaser stunned." McCoy proceeded to slap Kirk's face lightly several times. Kirk grabbed his assailant by the throat, rolled him down, and raised one hand to strike, but happily woke up before his instincts could complete the reaction. "Bones!" he said, looking down at the startled and annoyed face of his chief surgeon. "Yes, I'd like to try to keep mine in working order, thank you," wheezed McCoy, removing the other hand from his throat. "Oh, sorry," said Kirk. He sat back on his heels and let McCoy up. Then he put his hand to his forehead. "Headache?" "Yes." McCoy sat up, straightened his tunic, and picked up the kit bag he had dropped. He took out a hypo and gave Kirk an injection of Maziform D. The stimulant took effect quickly, and Kirk stood up, reaching to straighten his own tunic as he did so. He cringed as his hands met the fabric of the Neo-Samurai outfit. "I see you got it." McCoy nodded at Kirk's clothes, grinning. "Yes," said Kirk forbiddingly, and changed the subject. "How long till we leave orbit? I'll have to call the portmaster and arrange to have some things straightened out." McCoy shrugged. "You can call the portmaster. We're already out of orbit." "What?" "Received a distress call several hours ago from Starfarer, sir," Kyle said. "From Antonio Perez," McCoy added. "Antonio?" Kirk set off for the bridge, with McCoy close behind. In the elevator, the double take McCoy was waiting for hit Kirk. "Received several hours ago?" he asked. "Yes," said McCoy. "There was some safety margin, so Spock waited." "I see." They reached the bridge and found Spock explaining to the Starfarer that the Enterprise was now on its way to their rendezvous. "I take it you found Jim," said Perez. "Yes," said Kirk, leaning down to speak into the communicator at Uhura's station. All eyes turned to the captain, and stayed there. Kirk looked down at his clothes and cringed again. Then he carefully ignored his crew and went on in a cheerful voice. "Having a little trouble, Tonio?" "A little trouble? Second navigator is holding the ship together with baling wire and worry beads, if that's your idea of a little trouble. Where were you, anyway?" Kirk sighed and decided to brazen out. "In jail." "James T. Kirk has a record?" said Perez. "Oh, besides, I was innocent." "That's what you said the night the goat turned up in my Uncle Garcia's bed." "Give him my regards the next time you see him." "Uncle Garcia or the goat?" "Both." Kirk out. He inspected the bridge with a look that dared anyone to say anything. After a suitable interval, he announced, "Mr. Spock, you have the con." He turned back again. "Oh, and Spock—" "Thank you." "Captain," said Spock with a puzzled air. "For waiting." Spock opened his mouth. "Don't bother," Kirk said. "I'm sure you had a good reason." "Thanks anyway. I appreciate it." He yawned more widely than he needed to, smiled sweetly at them all, and left the bridge. "Mr. Spock," said McCoy, gazing at the closed door of the lift, "next time, you take shore leave, all right?" He turned to face Spock. Spock steepled his fingers and looked into the hollow of his hand